The heartbeat is humanity's native language. Before you learned your mother tongue, or any other language for that matter, you knew heartbeat. One heartbeat, in fact, that of your mother. Research shows that not only do babies in utero learn how to recognize their mother's voice and heartbeat, but they actually start to trust it. So that when those unborn people become born people, in this new world of shapes and sounds, they can find a place of safety and security at their mother's chest. There, the same voice that consoled them for the past 9 months consoles them again. There they feel the same warmth they had as their eyes and ears and all their members formed. But most importantly, they get the chance to hear that familiar heartbeat, that rhythm that first taught their heart to beat, a heart which overflowed for love for them then, and a heart that overflows with love for them now. And try and disconnect an infant from that heartbeat echoing safe space and just see what happens. Because it takes time. It takes time for that infant to have the cord of trust and security extend beyond the mother, for them to actually realize that not only can mom be trusted, but also dad and brother and sister and grandma and grandpa. But it's not long before that lifeline stretches too tight and that little child comes crying, crawling, and eventually running back to that place of safety and security, back to their mother's arms. And even after you grow up past the infant and toddler age, there's just something about a hug from mom. And yeah, some of us here this morning might not have that luxury anymore in the same way they might have used to, whether it be from situation or circumstance. Maybe even that cord has been severed by decisions made along the way, maybe even death itself. Regardless, there's something in the ideal of a hug from mom that's just comforting, in a place of safety. The one God holds to his heart. That's the way the Apostle John describes Jesus in the first chapter of his gospel. And though the reading we just had from the gospel has the line put this way, Jesus is the one who is in closest relationship with the Father. That's a good translation of the Greek words, but it kind of misses the punch and the point. If you were to translate it literally, it would say, Jesus is the one at the chest of the Father, which is a Greek way of saying he is the one who is hugged and held and dearly loved. And so what John wants us to do today is compare that picture of an infant at the chest of their mother and see how it pales in comparison when compared to the intimate relationship shared between God the Father and God the Son. But why? Why, at the start of his account of the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, does John take the time to focus on this seemingly hallmark-y, cutesy picture of the relationship between the Father and the Son? Why, out of all the identifying factors that separate Jesus from the rest of existence, does John highlight the eternal hug shared by the Godhead? Well, he does so that in emphasizing this love of the Trinity, he might expose the lovelessness of the world. By showing the perfect, he might reveal the evil. And by highlighting the ideal, he might demonstrate the problem. Because as the one that God holds to his heart, Jesus knows what makes God's heart tick. He knows what makes it beat and for whom it beats. For him, God's heartbeat is familiar. but not so much for sinful humanity. No, we see God, all right. We see him in the creation that surrounds us, but we can't hear his heart. We can see his strong arm in the fact that there is something rather than nothing. We can see his wise mind in the fact that the something that exists is very intricate and very detailed. We can even see his strong and just will in the fact that there's morality baked not only into the human heart, but into every civilization that has ever existed. We can see God, yes, but all we see on our own is a God of strength and wisdom and justice, a God that we sinners should be very afraid of. Because from our perception, what is a God of strength going to do except use that strength to subjugate and oppress a weaker people? And what is a God of wisdom going to do except hold that wisdom out at arm's length, just out of reach for the humans, so they never can be as wise as him? And what is a God of justice going to do except mercilessly punish those who don't live up to his standard of morality? That's how the unbelieving world sees God, and that's the only way that they can see God. Because on their own, they are unfamiliar with his heartbeat, and so what choice do they have? If they're going to be honest with themselves and look in this world, they have one of two options. Either they look at design and the fact that existence is there and there's morality and say that it's nothing more than the end product of natural processes and there's no divine influence, and so this whole God thing, well, it's just a myth and not worth my time. Or they don't get around the fact that there is so much design, there's so much power behind existence, so there has to be something or someone, but that something and someone definitely doesn't care about us, and so, again, he's not worth my time. And though that's the unbeliever perspective, the natural sinful dispositions perspective, we, by God's grace, have a different label. And it's not unbeliever, it's believer. And yet, there's that sinful nature inside of us, too, that likes to shout and rant and rave and cry and complain, just like the unbeliever of old. And maybe that sinful nature has more of an impact on us than we might first realize. Is it possible that we've forgotten what God's heartbeat sounds like? Is it possible that the words of this sinful world have started to make some sense? And when we think about God the Father, do we think about him like some kids who just messed up and are afraid of dad coming home rather than a child who's actively and eagerly waiting at the door? I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, at first glance, we look around this universe and our world, and the more you do, the more heartless God seems. We hear of tragedies and disasters, violence and conflict. We experience the nation falling apart, families falling apart, relationships falling apart, bodies falling apart, hopes and dreams falling apart. And behind each one of these decaying things, there's a very frantic heartbeat. You know how it goes when you're anxious and nervous. The faster and faster your heart goes, the louder and louder it becomes in your ears. With all these heartbeats racing at the same time, of course, we can't hear God's heartbeat. No, instead, he seems to be the only heartless one out there. If you're so powerful, why are things falling apart? If you're so wise, why are things falling apart? And if you're so just, why are the innocent suffering and the guilty going unpunished? Yeah, in this sin-sick world, we can't hear God's heartbeat. It's been going the whole time, of course, but our ears have been plugged as if filled with cotton. But this plug is not cotton itself, but instead the serpent's hiss. And our eyes have been darkened by this sinful world, so That when we actually found our footing and could actually walk, we ran, but not to our Father's arms, but instead to the arms of pleasure and profession and progress. John said it well. No one has ever seen God. No one has ever intimately known his heartbeat, except one, his one and only Son, the one whom God holds to his heart. And so if sinners were ever going to know the heart of God, they only had one option. There was only one that could do it. And who better? Who better to make known the heart of God than the one who intimately knows that heart himself? And so at just the right time, the Son released the Father, left the eternal hug shared by the Trinity, and came down into a world where a bunch of frantic hearts beat, and the consoling voice was not consoling at all, but a deceptive and lying voice of the prince of this world. And it is here that one and only Son of God made his dwelling. It is here that he became flesh. And just like a little infant's heartbeat syncs up with their mother's, so too God's one and only Son's heart was in perfect sync with his Father's. The Son's will was the Father's will. The Son's words were the Father's words, and the Son's heart was the Father's heart. And so as the Son went about his work, whether actively or passively, the people saw in him a different God, a God they had never known before, a God that was different than the God of strength and wisdom and justice. No, in Jesus they saw a God whose strong arm was not there to squash them, but to provide and protect them. In Jesus they saw a God whose mind was not set on holding knowledge and wisdom out of their reach, but a God who intricately designed the world so that humanity might explore and learn and grow and understand just how grand and glorious their God really was. In Jesus, they saw a God whose will was not just for the sake of punishing them, but whose will was just for the sake of blessing them, giving them gifts that depend on goodness and truth. But most of all, in Jesus, the world heard God's heartbeat again. A heart that broke at the fall into sin. A heart that wanted nothing more than to hold mankind to his chest. A heart that wanted to be known to his children as Father, the God of love. It was this heartbeat of the Father that got the Son through every moment of every day. That relationship between Father and Son, that cord of safety and security and trust, it had extended now from heaven to earth. And though they were apart, Jesus knew the Father was there. Jesus knew the Father was watching. Jesus knew the Father cared because he hadn't forgotten the heartbeat. But in a dramatic and twisted sense of irony, it was this heartbeat of the Father that would become Jesus' executioner's drumline. Because as the Son got closer and closer to completing the reason why he became flesh and dwelt among us, so too God's heartbeat got faster and faster. As the Roman gavel fell and whips striped his back, as the nails were driven true, and he was lifted high for all to see, the beats per minute of God's heart, incredible. His heart beat until, just like A gallows drumline stops at the moment of judgment. So too God's heartbeat stopped. The Father was gone. They had been distant for 33 years, yes, but this was different. He wasn't just distant, he was gone. The one who had promised that he would never leave or forsake him, the one who promised that he would always be there, always watch, always cared, he was gone. No wonder Jesus screamed. No wonder Jesus cried out with all his suffocating lungs could muster to a God who had promised to love him. But it was in vain. It was in that moment God had stopped listening. He had stopped caring. He had stopped loving, so that in the cries and screams of his one and only Son, the world might hear God's heartbeat. A God whose consoling word cries out, "I sacrifice my Son for you. Don't you see how much I love you?" Jesus is God's heart, dear friends. And his word, God's heartbeat. And if you ignore the Son, all you'll ever see from God is a God whose arm is too strong for you, a mind that's too big for you, and a will that's too just for you. But if you see the Son and hear his word, you will see a God whose arm and mind and will are driven and fed by a heart that lives and dies and rises for you. Jesus left the eternal hug shared by the Trinity to make room for you. In Jesus, you are the one God holds to his chest. You are the one who knows his heart. And it's there that you will find the promised grace in place of grace, the peace that passes all understanding, a peace that's only possible when you hear God's heartbeat. And so may we, like little children with ears to their mother's hearts, hear the heartbeat of God and have our hearts learn again and again how to be like the overflowing heart of the God who loves us, the God who created us, the God who gives us life. Amen.